Hey guys, it's Dan. Welcome back. I have what I think is going to be another exciting one for us here today, which is in this case a sponsored video sponsored by Forgotten Chapters, which is a company out of the EU that produce water slide transfers. They had reached out and asked if I was interested in reviewing a selection of their products for them, and I very happily accepted. So, as with any sponsored content, I just wanted to be clear and upfront that this was sent to me for free to review for all of you. So big thanks to Bruno over at Forgotten Chapters for arranging this for us. And let me be also upfront here that I was surprised when this arrived because I was expecting like 5 transfer sheets, and what they sent me was 25 transfer sheets. So as a result, this is probably going to be a slightly longer video than I typically do, but I think I owe it to them and to really all of you to go through these sheets in detail here. And so at the beginning, I'll be doing that. I'll go through these sheets individually, and then toward the end of the video, I would like to go through and see how they apply to miniatures. Let's talk about shipping here, because it was quick shipping to get from the Netherlands, where they're at specifically, to me here in the northeastern US. Took 6 days, and it was tracked. I could follow it the entire way here, and very well packaged. I think all the sheets have this little piece of wax paper in between them to stop them from sticking together. And then they were from there grouped and then individually wrapped in these plastic bags, and then those were stacked and put onto into a padded envelope. So in pristine condition, absolutely no issues with shipping in terms of timing or damage in transit or anything like that. No problems. Just so I don't have to keep repeating myself too, because again, I want to go through each of these sheets individually. Pretty much everything in their catalog is €9, so like 10 bucks US. So keep that in mind as you're looking at these, because some of these transfer sheets have like in upwards of 700 transfers on them. And remember, that's for like €9. And I can't stress to you, like we're going to look at the quality, we're going to look at how they apply to things. I think that's very important too. But in terms of value, I don't think anybody else is putting out this number of transfers for that price. These two, if you're not familiar with water slide transfers, are what are called pre-cut water slide transfers. And what that means, for those of you who maybe have dealt with like Games Workshop, back in the 90s, water slide transfers and hated them. A big part of why those were hated were because they were not pre-cut water slide transfers, which meant that you had to cut out the exact shape of whatever it is you were trying to apply. Whereas these, you can see, maybe if I get up close and kind of go at an angle here, you see where it's shiny here on the Templar cross itself. And it's very faint, but there's a line there showing that the cross has already been cut out. So when we're applying these, and we'll get to that at the end of the video, all I'll need to do is cut out like the rough shape around the Templar cross. I'll soak it in water, and then using a brush, I can then slide the cross itself off onto whatever it is I'm trying to apply it to. So it makes the application a whole lot easier when they are pre-cut like this. So I've organized them here in a way that makes sense to me anyway, which is that I have a stack of like 40K or sci-fi transfers. I have a stack of medieval transfers up here, and then I have a stack of what I'll call miscellaneous transfers down here in the lower right. So I think what I'm going to do is start working through the 40K ones first, and then the medieval, and then onto the miscellaneous, and then the second half of this video will be going through and trying to use some of these transfers. So let me get organized, and we'll start going through them together. So first up is a sheet that they're calling their Space Karens, that I might call Sisters of Battle. And you can see a huge number of like Flur Lee options, some hearts, some skulls, things of that nature. And I won't point it out in every single one of these sheets, but I will point out here that you can see even those tiny Fleur de Lis, as it passes under the light, are pre-cut as well. So you can imagine how frustrating those would have to be to cut out if they were not pre-cut, but thank goodness they are. So lots of cool options in terms of like Latin script. And then down at the bottom, you might notice there are some like book scripts, and I don't think I can get much closer than this without the camera getting blurry, but let that be some foreshadowing to one of the products they put out, which I think is probably one of the coolest things I've seen in the transfer space. But you can see just how detailed some of these scripts are, right? Next up is what they're calling the Templars / Teutonic crosses, and I would say this is more meant for 40K. Of course, Templar crosses could certainly be used for shields, like for Foot Knights, for example. But it's got some options down toward the bottom here that, in imply to me anyway that these are meant to be like Black Templar Space Marines, like these little shield options, little purity scroll bits down here. One other cool thing they've got here is kind of these long, kind of like chains down here that are, I think, very detailed. And I don't actually know that those are like meant to be for anything specific, but to me, it gives you a lot of options. Like you could cut that up into smaller strips. You could put that on the side of like a rhino or something like that. So I really like those kinds of options where it's sort of open-ended what it's meant to be for. And again, I think I'll be doing some of that toward the end here, is kind of improvising with some of these transfers, because they don't just need to be used for shoulder pads and shields. Now we're moving into what they're calling red scorpions, which I think is appropriate. So again, lots of like really small scorpion options there. Some of them are red. You got some black, gold, and white options as well. Some large ones. Some that have circles and some that do not. So yeah, just a great selection of options here. Some that are like left facing, right facing. So if you were putting this on, say, like a Space Marine, you could have, you know, one facing one direction on one shoulder pad, one facing the other direction on another shoulder pad. As I said, some large ones, which would be good for, you know, like the side of a rhino door. But to me, they also jump out as being potentially cool for like a hoplite shield or something like that. So this one is much like the Scorpion one, but they're calling this one Bloody Buzzsaws, which also seems appropriate since it's a blood drop inside of a saw blade. And I'll let you guys sort out for yourselves which Space Marine chapter you think that these would be most appropriate for. I'll stick to the names listed on the website from here on out. But yeah, as with the Scorpions, you've got some that are like black back, some that are white back, some that are just loose bloods. So again, as with the first one that we looked at, I like having options in terms of like what they could be used for. This one is called Bloody Hearts. So another one where we've got some small hearts up at the top, some slightly larger ones in different colors, different backing to it. And this one, unlike the other ones, has a cool like checker grid option down at the bottom as well. So very detailed. You can see like that compared to my thumb, just how fine the print is on that. Now we're moving into one they are calling just knee pads, which I imagine would be good for example, Terminators would be good for like jump pack Marines. So lots of sort of like generic looking options, things like lightning bolts, hearts, X's, and all, as I've pointed out in other ones, different color options too. So I think a very useful one there for you for Space Marine players. Here's one they're calling Bloody Birds. And again, whether historically correct or not, as a fantasy and historical player, this jumps out to me as like a cool medieval shield design motif. In addition to it, of course, being a great option for Space Marine shoulder pads. And then some small options down here for things like knee pads, jump packs, and then some purity scroll options down here as well. Here's one that's kind of difficult to see in the light, but because it's all white. But this is called Space Sharks, and this this Space Marine chapter I actually had to Google, but there is a Space Shark Space Marine chapter. Again, I'll let you sort out the name for yourself. Some small ones over here on the right, larger ones toward the center, and then some Roman numerals and arrows. Again, a little bit difficult to see in the lighting here, but some long script options down here too, which, as I said, would be cool for something like a vehicle or to cut up and use like on a banner or something like that. Now we're getting into Roman numerals. So they have several options for Roman numerals in several different colors. They sent to me white and gold. You can see in this particular case, they're actually not identical. So if I hold them side by side here, you can see like there's some circles here on the left-hand side that aren't on the right, and then vice versa. There's some options on the right here that don't appear to be on the left, but they are similar. It's mostly just white versus gold options here. So I think that the gold's a little bit easier to see, so let's go through that one here really quickly and up close. But you can see, again, using my thumb for scale, just how small and detailed these are. So lots of different options for Roman numerals. These, if you're curious, are actually pre-cut as, so like the Roman numeral 3, for example, is together as one Roman numeral 3. So it's not like, there you go, you can kind of see it there. That you wouldn't have to like assemble these Roman numerals individually. So very cleverly done that way. I think cut appropriately. And then we're moving into actually 4 different colors of what are called squad rolls. So we have them in black, we have them in gold, we have them in white, and then we also have a silver option. And this is the first one that we've come across so far that is actually 2 smaller sheets that are repeated. And I went through and actually counted just to make sure, but if you were to get the silver one, for example, it, I think would come like this. So you're gonna get 2 of these smaller sheets if you get the smaller one. But as with the last one we looked at, you can see that there are some differences between them in terms of layout. You can even see there's a gap here. There's some options on the gold one that don't appear on the black one, and vice versa. And then same thing here, like the white layout here is slightly different from the black layout. So again, there's some nuance between these individual sets, but I think by and large, it's mostly the color. I don't think you're really going to feel like you're lacking anything if you get the gold over the black, but the black being the easiest to see, I think maybe let's look at this one here up close. And again, I really am blown away by the detail in some of these. Like again, look at the laurel here compared to my thumb for scale. I don't have a banana for scale. But yeah, just really, really cool. And now let's move into medieval. And we're going to start with their Crusader orders. This is another one I counted. So this is actually 2 sets of Crusader orders. So if you got one of them, you would end up getting 2 like this, which I think I counted as 142 crosses, which again for €9, 142 shield transfers is pretty incredible, or barding transfers, something like that. So again, I've got 2 sets of these Crusader orders here. Let me peel these sheets off so you can see them. And again, this is duplicated, so we can look at one of these here. But yeah, isn't that fantastic, guys? Again, the scale is approximately correct for like barding or for a shield, for example. So I think I'll try one of those out here in a little bit and see how they go on. I also got Flur Lee's in blue and in silver. So again, maybe I'll take the sheet off of one of them here so you can see. And these look to be identical, and the only difference is just the coloring on them, but really beautiful. You can see very nice silver color. And as with the last one, if you order one of these sets, it looks like you're going to get 2 of these sheets, which is just, you can see how small some of these Fleur de Lis are. Just a huge number of transfers. Another good option, even if you're not a historical player, but for example, Sisters of Battle, you get like the one main set, maybe one of the silver ones. I think that would look pretty cool. And then blue, a nice rich blue color here on these. That's another thing I haven't pointed out. The coloring on these is, here you can get up close here. In addition to the detail being very fine, I was quite impressed with that there's no like bleed of the color, there's no fading anywhere. You worry that if the print quality is not good, that you're going to have irregularities and stuff like that, and there's none of that. Really fantastic. Now we're moving on to Kingdom of England Lions. This is the next set here. Nice rich gold color on these. Again, you're going to get 2 if you order one of these sets, and then you can see that very cool, very cool designed for Richard the Lionheart. And some of them have a like black outline to them, and some of them are just in the gold here. And then we're moving on to one that they're calling Medieval Trim, which, as with like what we saw on some of the 40K ones, I like again that they're not really suggesting what this is for. I think this would be great for, as I said, potentially banners, for barding. Again, you can imagine a nice long strip of this going along some horse barding or something like that. I have like a Perry medieval wagon. This would look very cool along the bottom trim of that. So it's really up to you. I think there's a lot of creative license here, but they give good options in terms of designs for you to work with here and kind of use your imagination as to where these could be used. So now we're moving into the miscellaneous category here. We've gone through 40K, we've gone through medieval, and we're going to move into what they are calling armored skulls. So you can see there's some white or silver ones there, and then there's some gold options. As with the Flur Lee, it looks like you're going to get 2 of these if you order 1. So if you order the armored skulls, you're going to get these 2 sheets. Yeah, very cool Punisher looking skulls there. I think it could be argued that those were like intended to be for 40K, but they're generic enough. I think they could also work for like an undead army for shield transfers. Now we're moving into what they're just calling skulls. The last one was armored skulls. These are just skulls. And you can see there is some conceptual crossover here. There's some white skulls, some silver, and some gold in this particular case. But lots of cool options. As I said, great for 40K, but also for kind of generic fantasy use as well. And then finally, we're moving into the last 2 sheets here that I'm really excited about. They sent me 2 of these. What they are calling purity seals, scrolls, and parchment. And we saw kind of a taste of this on some of the 40K transfer sheets, but let me bring this as close as I can so that you can see this sheet in all of its glory, because this is really cool. So in addition to, you know, some things like some small Fleur de Lis, some swords, skulls, things of that nature. They have small lettering here, which the letters are all individually cut out, but the real cool thing, as I'm sure you can see, are these purity scrolls, which are even come pre-curved to fit along maybe a Space Marine purity scroll. And then all of these like pages for scripts for the insides of books. Like what pops into my head is maybe like for the Games Workshop Plague Monks, they have an option for a book that you could then water slide transfer these onto. These would be great for banners. So you can see just really incredible detail on these, that I can make out individual fancy script letters on these books. I can even almost like read some of the words on these. I don't think I can get it close enough. It's gonna get blurry if I get any closer than that, but yeah, there's like some of this is in Latin. And anyway, so this is the Purity Seals, Scrolls, and Parchments sheet. I got 2 of these. And then I have one that is called Scripts A6. Scripts A6, which is just a wall of very fine print and scripts. Kind of, again, similar to what we just saw, but this is like, I keep talking about like open-ended design, where it's a nice long wall of script for you to then cut up however you like. If you want, for example, on the side of a rhino to have, you know, a wall of script like that, you could do that, or you can cut it up into whatever individual size you like. So there you go. In terms of like the quality of the print, as I've mentioned a couple of times, I think this is really beautiful stuff, guys. And I think it's really top notch in terms of how it looks as it sits on the transfer sheets. But I think, as I said, the other half of what matters when we're talking about water slide transfers is how do they go on to miniatures. So let me do that now. I'm going to take a selection of these on a selection of my miniatures in my collection, and we'll see how they come out. So let's dive in here. So I think that most people are going to be looking to use transfers for shields and shoulder pads, and that's what I'm starting with here. I'm starting with some shield transfers. I'm going with the Teutonic and Templar and Crosses sheet, and I'm choosing this deliberately instead of the Crusader Orders transfers because I really want to put these to the test and see if there's any bleed on these transfers, by which I mean if I have a dark background color with a white cross and there's any irregularities, if there's any transparency to the transfer, I should be able to see it. If I put a white transfer over a black background, it would be harder to see with a red transfer over a white background. So that's what I'm doing here, and what you'll find is what I found, which is that the print quality is really, really good, and there's absolutely no transparency to it whatsoever. You can't see any of the black background shining through. I have a dark red kind of alternate Hospitaller Knight I'm going to do this with as well, and you'll see the same thing there. Even with a bright red color, none of it shines through the transfer once it's applied. In order to put these on, I would soak it in water. I have a little shallow dish of clean water there off on the side, and you can see what I'm doing is roughly cutting the shape of whatever it is I want. So in this case, like these crosses, I just kind of cut a square around them to get them off the sheet. I dip it in the water for about 10 seconds, and then you can see I just slide it off with my brush. The technique specifically that I'm using is like I'll start sliding it off with the brush. I kind of pin it in place with the brush and then move the transfer sheet away from the transfer. That way I'm not so much pulling it off of the transfer sheet as I am pulling the transfer sheet away from the transfer. And what I found in doing that is that it's a lot less fiddly. You don't have to worry about kind of moving it around once it's on the miniature. Because typically when you start moving it off with your brush, you've pretty much already got it in the place where you want it to go. You just need to get the transfer sheet away from the miniature at that point. And here I'm actually weathering the figures just to show that you can apply paint to these after they dry without any issue whatsoever. I do recommend you use matte varnish. I would recommend that. Frankly, I recommend you use matte varnish even if you're not putting transfers on. However, certainly with transfers of any kind, you should put a matte varnish down once they dry completely. You don't want to have it on while they're still even slightly wet, because it's going to kind of reactivate the transfer and it'll slide around again from being hydrated again. Here's another, I thought, difficult test that I was trying out here, which is that I took the smallest transfers I could find, which are these Roman numeral 4s, and I'm replacing the freehand versions that I put on these 10 figures that I had done in a video previously. And I did this all in one take, and none of the footage that you'll see here, typically I speed it up 20%, like for my painting videos. None of this is sped up, and in this particular case, this is all you can see, one take, there's no cuts, because I wanted to show what I found, which is just how easy these are to apply. And this, I think, took like 2.5 minutes, so I apologize if it's tedious in any way, but again, I think it's important for you guys to see just how easy this was. All I did was I cut a strip of 10 of these transfers all on one strip, kind of almost like a hopper of them. I dipped the whole thing into the water, lined up the miniatures, and then you can see kind of assembly line style. What I'm doing there is sliding these transfers off one at a time, kind of working down the transfer paper and putting them into place on the shoulder pads. And what you will also see is that, as I kind of mentioned in the last example I was doing, is that once they're in place, you kind of pin it with your brush. I really didn't feel that I had to shift them around at all once they were in place there. Now, you should know that you can move them around if you add more water, for example. That's where you'll have a lot of like the bouncing of transfers around on the surfaces if there's too much water on it. And for that reason, I would recommend, at least starting out, that you don't add any water to the miniature or anything like that. There's plenty of water in the transfer itself once you've soaked it. So you want to have a dry surface that you're applying it to. And then I found that it really doesn't move around at all. But if you wanted to, you just add a little bit more water with your brush, and it will like kind of create a puddle there that you can move it around in. And then vice versa, if it's moving around too much, I had a stack of like dry brushes next to me there where I would grab one and wick the water away to kind of remove the puddle. And that would cause the transfer to kind of drop down onto the surface and stop moving around. But you have options there. If you want to move it around more, add more water. If you want it to stop moving, just take the water away. But you can see here, this is no issue at all. These transfers go on very smoothly, and because they're pre-cut, you don't have to worry about cutting out the Roman numeral in any way. You don't have to worry about, you would imagine like with a rounded shoulder pad, you could have an issue with a larger transfer that was cut in a different way, kind of bunching up or something like that. But there's no issue with that at all here, because the cuts around the transfer are so close to the motifs themselves. There's no problem with that at all. This was a very simple process. And then let them dry and apply some matte varnish to them. I recommend Army Painter. If you don't have a matte varnish of your own, I would recommend you pick that stuff up. It's very good. And just one kind of thinner coat of this stuff, and it will not only take away any of the shine from the transfer, but help to seal it in place. And that went well enough that I thought, let's do some more 40K stuff. So I've got a couple of flat surfaces on this crisis suit model that I thought would look cool with like some skulls and some arrows or something like that. And so that's all I'm doing here. I'm dropping some transfers on. Again, the only cutting that was required on the sheet was just to roughly cut around the edge of the transfer itself, and then just dip it in water and slide it off. Again, none of this is sped up, and what you see me doing is pretty much all I did. So I think this is really a straightforward process, especially once I've done it a couple of times. I had my headphones in and really wasn't giving it much thought at all. And you can see that there's not a lot of moving things around. As I said, if you find that there's too much water, you can just pull it away with your brush. Just keep a couple of brushes kind of handy there in order to do exactly that. And then sometimes you might have to like dab it down. This is me applying matte varnish again, but if it's in place and you find that there's any bunching or any like bubbles or anything like that, just take your brush and dab down onto it. Obviously don't slide side to side like you might with paint, because it will cause it to move until it's completely dried. But then once it's totally dry, you're golden. So with those done, I thought, well, let's start doing some weird stuff. I kind of got what I'll call the transfer madness, just because these really were so easy to put on that I just kind of kept grabbing models to slide transfers onto. This is a somewhat anachronistic model I use as a paymaster, and it has a leather jacket on that's paying tribute to my Terminator avatar that I had for many, many, many years. And I thought that these Space Shark transfers would look cool as a kind of Leatherman jacket kind of vibe, so I just slid that on. And it's a green stuff jacket, so it's kind of got an irregular kind of lumpy shape to it, but it went on without any issue at all. And then that finished looked so cool that I thought, well, I've got this Ogre Paymaster model that would look cool with a skull on his leather jacket, so I took one off of the, I think, Space Karen's transfer sheet and slid that one on. This is one where I did have to soak it for a little bit longer. Again, it's about 10 seconds, but the larger ones I found took probably like 30 seconds. And then there was one, it's the Parchment, that for whatever reason took probably closer to like 60 seconds. But I found the best policy is just kind of go in 10-second intervals. If you bring it out and find there's any resistance whatsoever, don't try to force it, just put it back in the water and give it a soak for a little bit longer. And then here you can see I'm putting multiple transfers onto the surface of this elephant here. Again, I think I've lost my mind, so I'm putting some prison tattoos on an elephant. But you can see even like the cluster of 3 of them there, it was no issue at all. Even if they bounce around a little bit, you can just take a dry brush and soak up the water and they'll stop moving. And you can kind of position them where you want them to be, let them dry completely, and then apply some matte varnish and they'll stay there forever. And then I had mentioned that I wanted to put some kind of pinstriping on this pay card of mine. And so this was probably the trickiest of the transfers that I applied, just because they're very long and thin. But what I'm doing is I cut out the transfers that I wanted, and then you can see I'm cutting them down before I soak them, because you can imagine a wet transfer is going to be very difficult to manipulate. And so I'm cutting it down to the size that I want before I soak it in the water. Now I'm soaking it in the water, and what I'll do, this is a really good kind of case study in this technique that I'm describing, which is that you want to start sliding it off the sheet. And once it's there, you pin it with your brush, what you see me doing there, I'm holding it, and then you're pulling away with the transfer sheet and then leaving the transfer behind kind of where the sheet was. And what this does is 2 things. 1, it gives you a lot more control and stability. And 2, it makes it less likely that the transfer will tear, because you're not yanking on the transfer as you would be if you were pulling the transfer off of the sheet. You're pulling the sheet away from the transfer and letting it kind of stay behind, again, where that sheet was. And that went so well that I'm now doing it on the other side. Again, I think this has come some cool pinstriping from their medieval trim transfer sheet. And I'll tell you guys again, I'm nobody. I'm not a genius hobbyist or anything like that. I really found this to be super easy, and I think that you could absolutely do this yourselves. I think a lot of us maybe had poor experiences with transfers from companies that maybe produce cheaper transfers, and they weren't pre-cut, and that made me put a bad taste in the mouths of some. But this was a totally different experience for me. These were incredibly easy to put on, and now I'm getting real crazy with it. I thought, well, what else could I do with these transfers? So the poor guys over at Forgotten Chapters are probably wondering what they were thinking sending these transfers to this crazy American. But what I'm doing is making a paper banner. And I have a couple of videos on making paper banners that maybe you've seen. So this is sort of just making the banner itself before that paper banner application process. So all I'm doing is I'm putting down a layer of paint here. I recommend, if you're going to try something similar, that even if it's a white background that you're trying to create for a banner, you should put white paint down for two reasons. One, because it adheres better. The transfers adhere better to paint, I believe. And two, that because we're dealing with, this is just printer paper, like regular computer printer paper, it'll make it less prone to tearing when it becomes very saturated from these water slide transfers being applied to them. That tan cream color, I guess I'll leave as a surprise. I'll let you find out what that is in just a few moments here. But here I'm applying the Kingdom of England lion transfers because I want to make a Crusade era banner here. So you can see, again, using this technique, I'm just sliding them directly off. I kind of pin it with the brush, move the transfer sheet away, and then it kind of drops it behind. And in all 6 cases here, because these are individual lions that I had to remove, they dropped exactly where I wanted them to go. I didn't have to move them at all. So it's the same technique even with paper here as it was with the miniatures. And then I would let these dry completely, because this is paper. Oh, here we go. So this is the parchment, the purity seals, scrolls, and parchment transfer sheets. Because while of course you could move these transfers onto sculpted purity seals, like say on a Space Marine, and I have some of those on my pay cart, and they would look fantastic. I was wondering if you could also, sort of in line with the paper banner that I'm trying to create some paper purity seals as well. So what I did is I had that kind of like aged parchment kind of color is what I was going for with that cream tan there. And I have all of these purity seals and some pages from books, some scrolls, and as with the Roman numerals, I just in one long strip soaked them in the water and then just slide them off one at a time. I'm not trying to keep them in order or anything like that. I'm just trying to put them down in a way that leaves some space in between them that'll make it much easier for cutting. But what I was starting to say with the banner is that once these are all on, you can see the paper's gotten completely soaked from this process. You want to let it dry totally. So I didn't play around. I let these dry overnight. And then, yeah, once it was completely dry, I threw a layer of matte varnish on, then cut them out. And we'll cut to that footage here in a second. But this is the one that I had mentioned needed to soak for like closer to 60 seconds. And I don't know why, maybe just differences in production, but there was no issues with them. It just, I had to soak them for a little bit longer. But as I said, I would just kind of go 10 seconds at a time. And then each 10 seconds, if you bring it out, if you find that it's not moving, just put it in for another 10 seconds. And eventually it will slide off. And they all slid off at the same time once it hit that like target saturation point. So as I said, we're going to let them dry overnight. I'm going to throw a layer of matte varnish onto them. And then you're going to cut them out and basically pick up where the making paper banners tutorial starts. If you haven't watched that, give that one a watch. I'm not going to go through the whole process of making a paper banner here or applying it, but you'll cut it out, glue it to the banner pole, and then add some PVA white glue to it and bend it into place, and Bob's your uncle. I don't know if I used that expression right, but it sounded right. And then you can do the same thing here with these parchments and cut them out as close as you can to the text I found looked correct, just for the scale that we're dealing with here. And I had an idea to glue these onto these flagellant miniatures that I've got. And I think if you were going to be really thorough about it, you could put a layer, like a thin layer of Elmer's glue, PVA glue over these once you've kind of bent them into place, as you see me doing here. And I certainly would do that, I think, if I had them hanging off of a banner pole. I don't want like the paper waving around like it's a real piece of paper. I want it to look sculpted like part of the miniature. But because I glued these all down basically onto the bodies of these miniatures, I didn't feel that it was strictly necessary. But as I said, you could certainly do that once you've glued it on, do a thin layer of like Elmer's or PVA glue, and it's never going to move ever again. And then once these were all on, I went through and did some weathering on them, did a little bit of Agrax Earthshade and some blood effects, because these miniatures already had some blood effects on them. Certainly if I'd planned this project out from the beginning, I would have done the blood effects absolutely last for the whole miniature after these were applied. But you can see here, again, there's no issue with painting these up however you like once they are created. And I think that the end result was pretty neat. So certainly something I'll try out again, because I've got lots and lots of parchment transfers to use them for. But as I said, you could also just slide them directly onto a sculpted purity seal and they would look very cool. And then from there, I was just experimenting with, using them for like ancient shield designs. And this is something that they had said they're gonna like start looking at. But for now, I've got these red scorpions that I mentioned kind of look like a hoplite shield, so I'm going to throw that over there. The other one has a Roman numeral 5 that I flipped upside down to make a lambda, I think that's what it's called. And I thought that the end result looked pretty cool. So yeah, get creative with it. Use your imagination and you can have some fun results. Really quickly, let's talk about the little big elephant in the room, which is Little Big Man Studios transfers. I've been using these for years and I think they're fantastic, but they do have 2 issues about them that I feel Forgotten Chapters addresses with their product. The first is price point, which is that each of their transfer sets come with between 12 to 16 shield transfers and are $5 US, whereas the Forgotten Chapters transfer sheets come with several hundred transfers and are €9, $10 US. Now, not an apples to apples comparison. These are not technically designed to be shield transfers, but of course, those in the biz know they certainly could be shield transfers. I intend to use these, for example, as shield transfers. And they also said that they're going to be making a foray into shield transfers, but instead of making the whole shield, they're going to be putting out just the motif, which has 2 benefits. One is that you can choose your own background color. Imagine having just the boar here, or just the bull here, as an individual cut transfer that would allow you to put it onto any color shield that you want. You would just do your own, weathering. But Little Big Men Studios, when you apply them, because it's the whole shield, including the back or color, which is great because it comes pre-weathered, the problem is it has to line up perfectly on the shield. Because if it doesn't, what you're going to have, you can even see it here, is a little kind of like lip from the edge of the decal where it's touching the shield. And if you don't line it up perfectly, you can even have things where it's like overlapping the shield boss, overlapping the edge of the shield, etc. And again, if you compare that to what I've done here with the shield transfer from Forgotten Chapters, you can see there's no such issue because the cut, instead of being the edge of the shield that you're trying to line up, is the edge of the motif. So again, I think that this is a better application method as a result, if you're comfortable doing your own background color for the shield and your own weathering. And here we go with some finished models at the end for anyone that was curious to see some final results. And anybody making this far, I'm sure, is wondering what's the verdict. And the verdict is these really are, I think, the best transfers I've ever dealt with, ever. They're beautiful from a production standpoint. They're very high quality prints. They're pre-cut, and the way that the sheets are laid out make them very intuitive and easy to use and apply to miniatures. You saw plenty of examples of that, and that was my experience. I felt that these were very easy and fun to put on. And to boot, they're some of the cheapest transfers I think that I've ever come across. I mean, you saw that there's some of these sheets, all of them are about €9, and they have, in some cases, hundreds of transfers on them. So certainly if you're a 40K player, I don't know that you need to go anywhere else. And even me as like a historical fantasy player, Dark Age, medieval stuff, there's already some sheets that I think are of value to me, would be of value to you. But if they start making like specific ones for those eras, I think that this is kind of your one-stop shop for transfers. Certainly for my own purposes, like the highest recommendation I can make is that I will be using these exclusively moving forward. They're that good, and I can prove it, which is that just keep watching my painting videos. You'll keep seeing these transfers pop up. So appreciate you all for sticking through to the end here. And until next time, happy gaming.